that much. Yeah.
Nah, man, you look nice and handsome.
All right, beautiful, beautiful. Well, that's what I was just fishing for compliments. You figured it out. Yeah. No, all
You're
right.
good to go. Let's get rolling here, man. Try to keep this as
All
around
right.
30 minutes. So today, I think I mentioned it to you earlier. I really just want to have that technical discussion about the
Right.
game's current state and what we got going on. So before we get started, to the millions around the world, today we have a very special guest. If you don't know who he is, you've never looked at a leaderboard in the last 2 years. We have Mr. Unmarked joining us today. How are you, sir?
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks for having me here, Centec. Excited to do it. Excited to be on your show for the very first time. So
we'll call it 1.5.
All right, deal.
Yeah. So, all right. So we're going to have a technical discussion today. Let's do a quick fast forward. Let's bring all of our listeners up to speed. There's a lot of new players and intermediate players that aren't really where we are today for this discussion. So let's spend a few minutes in the beginning and let's kind of bring everybody on the same level. And then we'll break into why we're here, what our thoughts are, and where we're going to go from there. So I'll start off, and then you and I will tag team it. So essentially, what we're going to do today, everybody, is we're going to talk a little bit about a slight pain point in the game. For all you people out there in the Discord or have seen some of our previous YouTube clips, or even in the IML League, you may have heard it referred to as the mini game. And it takes a lot of different shapes and forms, but essentially what we have today is we have this spot in the game where players are starting to become aware of how to play the game a little bit more optimally. And it really all revolves around the setup of the waves. So as you know, this centers around PvP, by the way. This is separate from solo.
Yeah.
So in the PvP dome, you have 2 shooters, and a number of waves offer an odd number of targets, right? So what that means is if there's a wave that has 3 targets that can all be closed on one shot, and you have 2 shooters, one person is going to be offered more points than the other. Now, if you're missing your shots and 2 players are missing left and right, this conversation, it doesn't really apply to you. This kind of centers around people who are somewhat hitting their shots. So the missing a shot conversation is going to be separate from this, right? Because we can go back and forth all day with, oh, you miss and you got to be hitting and you got to be accurate.
And this stuff it's only an issue when you have 2 closely matched players. I mean, it's not like this is playing this optimally. It's not like it's going to be some secret to have you beat a player that's considerably more experienced or better than you, but it just gives you a better chance in closely matched players if you're sort of playing this optimally.
Right, and it's a big chance too. So that's actually a good point, is that it's what we're talking about here today for the listeners. It's the opportunity to score the points. So if you're presented, that's how this whole game is played. It's about opportunities, right? You make the right decisions. You have to be the opportunist first, and then you take your shot, and then you score the points. So
and I would say that the issue isn't exactly that there's odd numbers of shots on some waves, because imagine a situation if there was odd numbers of shots on every wave, but every shot was sort of equivalent in the number of points, that would actually be fine. The issue, the most common place where this pops up, so people know what we're talking about, is the first shot on a lot of waves can be really bigger than the other shots that are on there. So you'll end up sort of trying to play games so that you make sure that you get that first shot on a wave, and in doing so, the points can really add up. It can absolutely make a big difference.
Yeah, no doubt. You jumped in front of me by about 30 seconds there. I was just getting to that. I
wanted to steal your thunder.
You want to steal that thunder? No, because that's what we were getting to. So it's all good. It's really the opening shot, but a little bit of the backstory leading up to the opening shot is being presented with the opportunity to take the shot. So it really is around the opportunity. It's just a matter of which target you're shooting at, right? And in this case, what we're getting ready to discuss is the openers. So with Unmarked's previous comments there, we'll segue right into it, is that mathematically, right, openers in this game in 2022, with the way it's laid out, openers are mostly broken. So what I'll do is I'll overlay some video clips here of some YouTube highlights that I have that shows you the potential, how many points you can score versus your opponent. So essentially where we're at here to kick off the conversation is we're in this spot where players are getting hip to the idea that you want to go first, power up waves aside. So the question becomes, well, how do I go first? What do I do? And like Unmarked said, if the score has a difference of 400, 500, 600 points between you, you're taking that last shot anyway. This doesn't really apply. This is more for players who are closely matched at whatever level you are. And essentially what's happening is we're finding players who are getting kind of shifty, and they're trying to play what we like to call the mini game, right? So now the next question is, what's the mini game? And here we go. So here's our conversation, is that the mini game is a way to manipulate either the game or the wave clock in order to leave your opponent with the last shot, or we'll say an undesirable shot, right?
Yeah, essentially that's it. It's just a way to playing the game, playing little things that are maybe just slightly outside the spirit of the game as the gods, the devs intended here. It's sort of somewhat as opposed to what I'm pretty sure that they wanted. But it's just a way to guarantee, or to, well, not guarantee, but to give you a really good chance to get that high point shot that is coming up, because you've played these waves 100 times and you know what's coming next. And so you do whatever you can to get that. And I'll disagree a little bit. I don't think not every wave is a problem. I think it's just some certain waves. And the devs actually, like before you even started playing, maybe almost 3 years ago now, the devs did add the 50-point bonus to finish a wave. And that was in some ways to counteract the advantage of having that first shot on the coming wave.
Right, the offset. Yeah.
And in some waves, it does a really good job of offsetting that. But in some, the opener is just so powerful on the wave that it doesn't yet counteract it. I mean, it doesn't do enough.
And let's say out of 90% of the scenarios we're talking about, the 50-point bonus, it doesn't really add, right? So mathematically, it's more advantageous for me to give you that 50-point bonus and take the opening shot on, say, like reps wave 2, right? That's 350 plus,
that's
even
easiest,
with diminishing, right? So it's a really small amount of times that 50-point bonus comes into play. It's really not even worth discussing, but it is there, right? And if you remember in the previous beta, they actually bumped it up to, what was it?
It was 100.
100?
No,
yeah.
I think it was 100 in the beta.
It was an additional 100 on top of the 50, I think, right? For like the 150? Or was it the total?
I'm 90% certain it was just 100-point bonus flat instead of the 50-point bonus.
But I forget the number.
Yeah, it's been a little while, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, it didn't make its way to production, but I remember you and I testing that a little bit, and they were kind of on to a little something there. But where we're basically at here for a conversation is, do we want the game to work this way? Is it unmoral? Is it unethical? Do we want to continue playing this way? Is it broken? Do we think that this is okay, right? And these are where all the conversations come in. And before we get started with any of them, it's probably important to note that neither myself or Unmarked have any affiliation with One Hamsa whatsoever. This is strictly for entertainment purposes only, and just two of some of the best players in the game discussing their ideas and thoughts. So take it with a grain of salt, take it as you will. So that's where we're at, is do we think that this is a lot of conversation around this too as well. So, do we think that this is, I mean, we know it's not their intention. This is more of a side effect, right? So like, if you remember 2 years ago, this was prominent, but it was tiny, right? There was only a very small subset of players who were really even doing this because there was a big skill cap in the game. Games weren't close 90% of the time, aside from 2 or 3 players.
I don't even remember when this exactly, I wouldn't say that it became a problem. I mean, I'm sure it was gradual, but I can't think of really even the first players to start doing this. It might have been Boztich a little bit. I don't want to blame him, but I mean, it was going to happen. It was some conversations before you even started playing, I think, that Boztich and I were having about. The issue would be is that the way it first manifested for us was that there's some targets that you would intentionally not close so that you would give the other person the last shot so that you would then get the shot on the next wave. That's the way it first sort of started. And we realized, I mean, our sort of agreement, or the unspoken agreement maybe between us at the time, is just always try to close the target. And that works up to a point, but there's sometimes when you do, it's awkward because there's sometimes when you do accidentally miss a shot. It absolutely happens. And when that happens in those situations where it actually is advantageous for you to miss that shot, it's really awkward. And you don't want a situation in the game where you have to trust somebody from over the internet. I mean, we're a pretty close-knit community, so we kind of know each other, but you still, you know, I mean, it's just not, you can never know 100% somebody's intentions. And so that was the way it first sort of popped up. And before that kind of stuff would be happening, I was always of the opinion that you just try to close the targets. I think it was Boozy that used to say just ABC, always be closing.
Hey, shout out to Boozy. Boozy was my coach. ABC is the method that I put.
He was your coach, really? Oh, yeah, I guess I forgot that. Yeah.
So if Buckeye's out there watching, she'll have a nice laugh at this too. ABC is always be closing. You mentioned a really good point earlier, and I want to make sure we segue into it. This whole conversation about the opener centers around actually knowing what's coming next.
Yeah.
So there's a small conversation to be had where you can say, well, you don't really need to know what's coming next. 90% of the time, it's advantageous to go first. The waves that offer the power-ups, you take the crookeds with the straights, right? So you were kind of in this meta where it's like, and you'll see it posted a lot too, and players are starting to chat about it, is like, well, I don't know what's coming next. So now you have to memorize what's coming next. And you know, it's kind of like, it's true, but it's not true. So if you know what's coming next, because the waves tend to stay the same aside from mystery mix, which doesn't apply, then you're in a better spot than your opponent, right? And whether it's a large percent or a little percent, let's say you're still in a better spot. And the goal of this game is to position yourself to score more points than your opponent, right? So with that said, we're at this point now where the conversation can actually start. And it's like, what do we think of this? Is this how we want to stay with the game going into an Olympic sport? You know, what do we want to do around this whole, let's call, gray area, right? And one of the things I want to bring to light first, because I think it's actually pretty impressive, is that you actually have impressively found a way to take what I'm going to call as broken and patch it with the current wave configuration in place around your theoretical new unmarked system that you and I were demonstrating not but a couple weeks ago. So you don't have to get too far in depth with it, but I know there's a few people out there who are really looking forward to hearing the master himself explain it. So if you wouldn't mind, maybe just a couple minutes, kind of tap on it.
It's in the most basic sense, the problem comes down to, as we've talked about, there are shots that you just are undesirable, that it's disadvantageous for you to take that shot. So there come situations in the game where, same thing, nobody wants to take that shot. So unless you massively change the way the game is set up, there has to be some sort of rule or ruling or game system that comes down from on high that says, well, you know, I know neither of you guys want to take this shot, but somebody's got to take it.
Somebody's got to do it, right? And essentially, if we can put a quick pause right there, what you're talking about, that massive overhaul, it's the wave configuration, right? Waves would need to be redesigned in order for all of this to go away.
And I think that is such a huge ask at this. That is not going to happen at this point in the game's development. I mean, there's not going to be some sort of massive overhaul that eliminates the wave system or does something like that. So we got to work within the confines of the system. And we know that the current wave system, there's some places where nobody wants to take a shot. And I will just quickly say that the devs did implement a fix to this already that didn't quite work perfectly, and it has its own problems, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit. But they tried to institute a wave timer, which would guarantee the wave ends, so eventually it just ends if nobody wants it. But
we figured out a way around that, didn't we?
Yeah, we messed that up pretty quick. Us annoying players really ruined the devs' intentions there. So my idea, and it's actually something that Bostich and I have tested for a little while previously, but it's essentially, okay, you're in a situation where nobody wants to take a shot. The player with the lower score takes the shot. It basically is what it is. And I figured out some ways to, like, in the game code to actually legitimately force that, but that doesn't really matter. What needs to happen is somebody has to take it. And the system I'm proposing is that it's the lower scored player that takes it in the current game score of the 500 to 500 tug of war. And at first glance, I know that seems kind of unfair that the lower point score or the lower scored player has to take it. It sort of punishes being worse in that situation. But ultimately, it rewards getting the most points, which is why I sort of like it. That's what the game should be about. And
in your opinion,
it could have a potential like downside, a bit of a snowball effect that can happen in some situations, because once you have the lead, then you have a better chance to hold on to it. But bottom line, in a perfect world, the game should be on every shot you try to get the most points you possibly can. And it 90% of the time it is that now, but there's some wrinkles where it doesn't work out that way. So this system, basically just says, well, you know what? Every shot you better be trying to get the most points, because at some point there's going to be a shot that comes up that nobody wants. And if you got the lower score, you're going to have to take it. I mean, it's not a perfect solution. I don't think there is one, but it's one that I've played around with for a while. Yeah.
And I remember actually testing that with you 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it's actually when I started out saying this, it's actually pretty impressive that you've actually found a way to kind of take the brokenness and just kind of like slap a Band-Aid on it that keeps the game moving. So it's a pretty impressive theory. I'll jump back on a few of that with some of the thoughts that I've instituted, and it's really this back and forth of how do we find a way to really balance this. So my personal take on this is more mathematical, whereas yours is more kind of like flow of the game, right? You want to just score as many points as possible every shot, and you want to make the game center around who can hit the biggest shot all the time. So what I tried to do was look at the math. So with that system, which is definitely impressive, and I actually do have a recording of it too. I think we laid down a recording of that. But we found some trouble trying to recreate the actual scenarios, right? So it was
funny. I mean, we tested it out for maybe 30 minutes or something, and then
barely do it.
All of the big problem waves. What is it, like Open Space 2 reps? There's a few others. One shot is also. I'd say Open Space 2 and one shot are the two biggest problem waves. Yeah. But I don't think we ever got those.
RNG wasn't on our side that day.
It just didn't work out. Yeah.
No doubt. So it works well. And then the problem that you run into ultimately, and we left out a lot of your intricate checks that you're doing for the sake of the conversation, but let's say your system starts kicking in and it starts working. And at the end of the day, to the right of the equal sign, what happens is the person with the higher score gets to go first, right? That's ultimately what happens. And one of the problems that I ran into with that is that mathematically it's not balanced, and it's not accurate that you got the opening shot because you wound up being 50 points better than me. Because if I overlay some of the videos that I have here of on these YouTube highlights, you'll see most of these shots, let's say 90% of them, always going to be exclusions, but most of these shots offer north of 250, 300 points, right? So it's almost like you outscored me by 17 points, let's say, right? Or 18, because you can't control the number, right? So now you get offered this massive shot that puts you greatly in the lead if you hit it right, but you got that off of 17 to 50 points or something. So it was really weird to kind of say like this works, but at the same time, we couldn't even find a damn spot to recreate it. So it was like such a low amount of times that it was even gonna be in place, which brings us back to the original problem of what do we do, right? Like, how does this get fixed? Because we know the waves aren't going to get reconfigured. So one of the things that I saw.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
No, go
before
ahead.
I get started.
Fine. All right. If you would
go.
No, I mean, it's all right. Just silence for the next 15 minutes, whatever. I mean, it's just, again, if we're not expecting, I guess my whole thoughts on this, the best way I can summarize is if there isn't going to be a massive overhaul in the game, there's going to be situations where neither player wants to take a shot, and we have to figure out a way how do you choose who shoots. Yeah. I guess that's I'm not saying that my solution of the higher scored player is the best one, but it's one of the few things that is consistent. I mean, scoring is what the game is about, and you can't let the lower scoring player take it, because then you get horrible situations where people are specifically trying to people start taking skulls on their shots to try to get that lower score.
I have video clips of players throwing the ball into outer space. Well, blank space, let's say, in the dome. Just to do it. Yeah, no doubt. You've got this really unique scenario where players are getting really shifty trying to get that shot. But there's a couple ideas that we have floating around out there that I at least want to get mentioned here. And that is that I love let's call it the gentleman's agreement, right? That's what we've been calling your idea. It works really well. I love the idea of who can hit the bigger shot. I love it, right? I don't like it with the way the current waves are configured. So for example, if there's 3 targets on a wave, take it's what is it? It's
Open Space 2
is it 2?
Open Space 2 is probably the best example of where this kind of doesn't work as well. Yeah.
So, but there's a lot of those scenarios, right? This is the one that I have in front of me. Is that Open Space 2 Wave 1? There's 3 shots. It's a combo shot, and an individual.
Yeah.
So
if you play it perfectly, there's 3 good shots on the board.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Right. So when you run into this scenario where you start to create this massive snowball where the other person doesn't even have the opportunity to score as many points as the first shooter. So right off the bat, I'm like, no, I don't like it. So then one of the stuff that I really saw. I guess
the downside to it is that it just one of the downsides to my system, the gentleman's agreement, is that it does increase the strength of the server. If you have first shot, especially if the first wave is a problem wave, that first wave edge going into wave 2, then the server gets a slightly bigger advantage than they currently have.
And
on those waves,
that's off the serve, though. Remember, at any point in time, the game can go back to 500-500, which essentially is the serve. So it can just repeat itself some course into the game.
Yeah, and there's some luck involved. Absolutely. It may just come out to where again, I'm not saying that somebody that's at 495 to 505, I'm not saying that 505 player really is better than the other one, that they really deserve to get that good shot, but it's just, you got to decide somehow. And
somebody's got to do it. Yeah.
It sucks. It sucks for this game, but especially if it's like a tournament match or something, we're playing best of 5, best of 7. So a lot of that should sort of even itself out, but we all know in this game there's some luck involved. You can get perfect. You can get that nuke on rep 7 or 6, or you get the nuke or the wrecking ball is huge there. So, there's just places where you get the lucky bounce, so to speak, and it's your day.
Hey, cheese, man. Cheese is a big thing.
Yeah, right. Succinctly said. Yeah.
No, that's actually a good note to point out, is that luck is definitely a part of it, no doubt. Some of the other ideas we have floating around, though, that can maybe work off this system or maybe piggyback off it or combine it. Some of the things that I submitted is I really liked the idea of nerfing the openers. So you don't have to reconfigure the wave, but you take the diminishing system that's already in place and you amplify it a little bit just for the first
specifically
possession.
For the first shot.
Yes.
Yeah, on a wave.
So that was a really good way to do it, because now you have these bonus points at the end of each wave, which I still think should be buffed a tad bit, which is my next idea. So if you buff the closing bonus, nerf the opening diminish, you kind of get into this spot where now you have to hit this opening shot. Not perfectly, but you have to hit it really well in order to get that big, exciting, huge lead that we all love to see play out on the screen. So those were 2 things side by side that I kind of threw out there that worked pretty well. And
those are good. I do like those ideas, and they would be both of them are good and be something fun to test with. We already sort of did test with the amplified wave bonus at the end.
Yeah. Right.
I guess I'm not saying, I do think some of those could be really positive, but I guess at the end of the day, I don't think it really solves the issue of it is always going to be the case in the game that some shots are just better. There's, like you brought up before, it may be that, you give up the 50-point closer, so you've thrown away 50 points and maybe a little bit more, but the next shot's worth 100. So you're gaining points on that trading down, as you're saying there. There is always every wave pair, which is the way I kind of like to look at the game. Like each person gets a pair of shots. So there's one for you and then one for your opponent, or vice versa. It goes back and forth. Somebody's always going to have the better chances on those. And no matter how we adjust the points, no matter what kind of games we try to play to minimize these situations, which some of these things will minimize it, but no matter what, one shot's always going to be more valuable than the other. And so I still think you're going to have some way to decide who takes that shot.
You are, definitely. And one of the things that I was building up to here is it's always going to be in a situation where somebody has to take the shot. What we want to do, though, is, or at least what would be ideal, is we want to find a way to, you want to make sure that you're getting rewarded if you're playing better, right? And you also want to make sure if you're playing worse, you still have some kind of an opportunity to come back, right? So right now, the way it works is that if I win the opener on reps wave 2 and I'm up by 100 points, I can essentially get you within one shot of a KO if I hit that. Now, just like you say, the devs didn't intend it to be that way. I can promise you nobody wants this game to end on 2 waves because you missed one shot. That feels really, really bad. So
it does.
So with that being said, we want to find a way to put something in place that forces the better player to stay better, right? And not just work off their snowball that they earned previously. And this is why I really like your idea plus some of these others. There's a lot of good ones floating out there. And the next one that I'm getting ready to bring up here, and you got to let me read them because I got a lot going on here. So I'm trying to just go through my text file. You and I discussed this earlier, is that I really like the idea of removing this wave timer. As much as I like the wave timer, I like the idea of removing this wave timer and putting in a shot counter. And I think you and I recently discussed this.
And that could be an interesting idea.
With a shot counter, now you only have so many shots, period. There's no timer, right? So the shot counter introduces this optimal idea of, oh shit, I need to make every one of my shots count.
And what you're basically saying is, for instance, each player is going to get 4 shots on a wave.
Whatever it was, yeah.
And then it ends.
Yeah.
And then it ends. So, yeah, everybody, Which, I mean, when you mentioned it, I hadn't really considered that exact idea before. I think the thing I brought up that I worry about a little bit is some waves have 10 shots on them and some waves have 3 shots.
You're not going to be able to get them all. So you do have to find that number, right? No doubt there's some math involved and the devs would have to step in here. But let's just work off the idea and say there's a shot counter and maybe it adjusts per wave, right? The devs may be able to do that. Who knows? But we can remove the display of the shot timer and we can put the shot counter right on the bottom of the dome so you can see where your shots are, or we hide it, right? So if you hide the shot counter, you have no idea where you're at unless you're counting, but you don't know where you're at.
People should be able to count to 3 or 5.
Exactly,
I mean, if they can't,
right? So you already have 9,000 decisions to make in 8 seconds. So let's make it 9,001, right? And if you don't know where you're at with your shot counter, now you're just saying to yourself, well, I need to make this count, right? So like that's a really interesting idea that could kind of piggyback off some of these other ones as well.
So I guess what would end up happening, I mean, it all depends on the wave configuration, but if we say that each player gets an even number of shots on a wave, it's sort of going to be predestined from the beginning of the set that whoever serves or whoever doesn't serve, it depends. It could go either way. But like, I guess what I'm trying to say is at the beginning of the set, you will know if you're going to have that big opener on the 3rd wave or the 4th wave, or if the other guy is going to get the opener on the big 3rd wave or the 4th wave. Unless, I guess, are we still saying that if you close out all targets on a wave, then the wave ends?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it would depend, right? So, like, if you get 5 shots and you end yours on the 5th shot and there's still targets left, the wave just flips. Just like the wave timer now. So the logic is already there.
But, for instance, like with open space 2, wave 1, there's potentially 3 shots there. The wave is still going to flip over to the next wave.
Oh yeah, you wouldn't just sit there and hit the ball at spaces.
Okay, yeah. Never. I take it back then. So it wouldn't be predestined then. There's still it's still somewhat unknown who would get the shots. Okay.
And even to that avail though, you're still going to know because remember we're in the memorize what comes next meta, right? So like you're eventually you're going to figure it out if you're moving your way up the ranks, like my boy Night Reacher does. Shout out to Night Reacher, by the way. So the other thing, so we've got, where we at? I got about 7 minutes left. Let me throw out one more idea. I'll turn it over to you and then we'll do some closing remarks. I know we've been discussing this one. One of the things that I personally would love to see when you get those really tight battles like you and I have quite a bit, you work your way all the way into that final wave, 7 or 8, whatever it is. I would love to see the game shift towards no wave timer at all on the final waves. Like it must be finished to get that really climatic, exciting close, which a lot of the times happens anyway. But these last waves are designed to have some finesse in them. So that's an interesting one too.
I think it's sort of. So they're currently, for people that don't know, the last wave has 2 minute timer to it. And I think it is really rare to have a last wave that isn't going to be finished in 2 minutes by top players.
You're right. You know what? I forgot they bumped it.
The one that comes closest is at Hara, I'd say. But even that, I don't know that I've ever, maybe once or twice I have had time run out there with 2 minutes still, but it's rare.
It's rare. Yeah, it is rare. But I forgot they bumped it to 2. That's my bad. I did forget that. But either way, with the timer, you still run into the potential of kind of running out of time. And I guess even with a shot counter too, right? You would run out there, but the goal would be that if the shot counter is implemented, get rid of it on the last wave. So no time, no shot counter, you just play.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting concept that we could toss around.
And I think, and that is I think that is a really great change that they made on their last wave of big changes when they added the shot clock and the wave timer and all that stuff, and the diminishing returns, which we haven't really talked about yet. But anyway, I'll get back to it. That addition of having just the last wave that basically won't end until you finished all the targets, I think is great. The other thing I want to say that we kind of touched on it, but I think is a really potentially good idea as well, is we talk about when we're playing a game, essentially you need to get 500 points more than your opponent to win, because you're starting off at 500, and once you get to 1,000, 0, game's over. When there's 300-point shots in the game, it could be 2 shots that win it for you. And you can win the game on your second shot if you get, what is it, like tic-tac-1? You can definitely do that, where you can, if you on your first shot get 300 points or 275, and then the other person misses, you can finish it right there.
That's a pain point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I loved, one of my favorite changes they made on that big last update they did was the diminishing returns above 250. I actually would like to see it start earlier than 250. I could see a good argument for 200 or even 150. It doesn't have to be aggressive at the 150 to 250 range, but I still think there's a good argument that you should slow things down a little bit and not make those giant shots so giant. But yeah, it's something worth playing around with anyway, and then seeing what the effect would be.
No, I floated that idea as well. Buffing the diminishing returns, there's definitely a strong conversation to have, because essentially what that comes down to is how much of these waves do we want to see play out, right? So you have a decent player versus a newbie or something like that, or you got 2 competitive players and one's not playing up to their speed one day. How much of these waves do we want to see, right? So out of every set that has every wave, out of 100% of 100% of the waves, at the moment, we're not seeing a whole lot of wave 7s, wave 8s. Like we see them, but out of 100% of the games played, we're not seeing a lot. So
no, and I don't think that's the worst thing necessarily, because if 2 players are not evenly matched, it's probably better just to get it over with rather than drag it out. And so you can quickly get back in another match with the same person or somebody else.
If you're not evenly matched, though, you're going to beat your opponent quickly, even buffing diminishing returns having gone in place. That's going to happen no matter what. Yeah.
Slightly slower, but it'd be very similar. Yeah.
So I love the idea of buffing the diminishing. Personally, I do think that they should buff that a little bit more. It's still big, right? We're in a meta right now where, and you and I say this all the time, if you fuck around and miss 1 shot and your opponent actually capitalizes on it, you're in the hole big time. And this isn't a 2% thing. You miss 1 shot and I score. Remember, it's a swing scoring system. So if I score 200 and you tank something, it's a 400-point swing. And there's only a bucket of 1,000 points, which is the segue into my next topic that I really want to bring up. Is I would actually love to see the bucket of points be increased. I would love to see the 1K knockout go to like 1,200, 1,400, which essentially is just maybe 2 or 3 more shots to get the KO. But I think a pretty strong conversation that can happen.
No, I think functionally that's sort of the same idea as just increasing the diminishing returns on high shots. If you nerf all the shots, or at least you nerf the huge shots, it's going to take more shots on average, more time on average to get to that 1,000 points. But I think a similar effect, very similar effect could be had by just bumping it up to 12 or 1500 or whatever. I'm guessing the devs are, and I also do kind of like just the evenness of 1,000 is kind of nice, but it does, it could, and it would be an interesting change.
Yeah, so if you put both in place, so I think where we're at is if you buff diminishing returns and bump up the bucket, right, is that if you just do one or the other, it's essentially ipso facto, right? It's just the same thing in the opposite direction. But if you do both,
right,
you have a really interesting scenario where the game always creates these new shots that are coming in play. Like you and I swear every day I'm like, all right, I've seen it all. And then I play you and I'm like, whoa, I never seen this shot before, right? Like we leave a piece of the target behind, and like there's always this dynamic to the game where something's always brand new. So yes,
you definitely, that is one of it is crazy sometimes where people just, maybe somebody else at some point, somebody accidentally does a shot and then you're like, whoa, I didn't even realize that was possible. And then you make the effort to try to reproduce it and figure out how to do it again. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. It's one of the best parts of the game.
So we were talking about increasing the bucket and buffing diminishing returns. Pretty good points to be made there. Could make for some interesting gameplay.
Absolutely. Yeah, again, a lot of these things are interesting ideas, and I think a lot of them could work really well. It comes down to sort of testing. It's hard to get a perfect sense of how these things play out. I mean, for instance, the wave timer system that they added into the game at first, when we first played around with it a little bit, it seemed like, this could actually solve the problems with the game. And actually, I'd argue now it made it worse. Until you get a sense to play around with it a bunch, it's hard to know exactly the effect that it'll have on a complicated system like this.
It is, no doubt. I mean, you have to get that. Conceptual ideas are really tough in this game because there's new scenarios created every day with missing shots or combos or stuff like that. So you definitely do have to test. But in theory, though, we've got some pretty good ideas laid out here.
Oh, absolutely.
And hopefully for the listeners, you guys can kind of see where we're at with this, knowing what's comes next and kind of timing your shots. Don't get any ideas, you guys. Don't start promoting it. But no, it creates an interesting scenario because it's optimal to play this way. There's no way I'm giving the best player in the world the opportunity to score 350 points. I'm not doing it. I don't care what anybody says, right? And you should do the same because it's optimal.
The game should be played to win. The game should be played to get the most points you can. And sometimes you have to use. I mean, you implied it sort of earlier, but that it's somewhat immoral to play this way. And it only is if the two players have agreed to not play that way, and then they do. But you can't have those kind of things be overlaid onto the game. I mean, the game should be played to get the most points possible. And right now, unfortunately, some of these not super exciting and sort of tedious strategies are the optimal way to play.
Right. And just as a side note there, I wasn't saying immoral for anyone listening. I was saying, is it immoral? Is it unethical? Personally, I don't feel it is at all because that's the way the game is played right now.
No, I don't think it is immoral or unethical. I just think it
sucks.
The only way it would be is if you promise somebody, I'm not going to play like that. And then in the tournament final, you're like, well, you know what? Fuck you. I don't care. Fuck you. I don't care what I said. And then you do it. But as long as that's not going on, which it isn't. So then, and there's no ethical problems there.
No, not at all. Yeah, you can't be cheesing people out here in internet land. Yeah, so that's pretty much where we're at. I don't have much else to add here. We went over some really good ideas. I hope everybody should be up to speed to kind of like where we're at with this, because it's a very prominent conversation that's been happening across the boards here. So
for a while, yeah.
So I think we covered some pretty good ground. I'll turn it over to you. I don't know if you have any closing remarks or if you want to add anything in there we missed.
No, honestly, I can't really think of much else that we haven't already covered about it. It's just it's a small wrinkle in an otherwise great game, I'd say. I mean, obviously, it's definitely my favorite game. That's zero doubt of that. But it's a problem only at the highest levels of the game right now between closely matched players. And even so, I don't want to overstate. So it's a small section of the game that it impacts there. But then also, I still think it's only some waves in the game of the 85 or give or take waves, something like that, I think, are in the game. It's not a lot of them. It's definitely more than it should be, and it happens more than I'd like, but it's not consistent that this happens, as we sort of mentioned before, where we had a hard time just unluckily getting the waves, that it was really a problem when we were sort of testing this. But so it's a small problem in some senses, but I guess what I'll end it with is that the biggest problem that these problems cause is that it makes the game boring in those sections to watch and to play. It really slows down what otherwise is an interesting and exciting game, and sort of just makes it come to a crawl and just makes it tedious. And it's unfortunate to go from a game that's super awesome most of the time, it then has these really slow, tedious, boring sections in others occasionally. So yeah, if we can eliminate or at least minimize those sections, that'd be great.
Yeah, some pretty good points there. I will counter with, it is definitely not, as I go through my list of screenshots here, it is definitely not a small amount of time this happens. It happens a lot. It depends on what the score is during those times. That's the more accurate thing to say. So as I kind of go through all the waves here that I have laid out, I'm looking at Tic Tac, I'm looking at One Shot, I'm looking at Duplo wave 3. That's a huge one. There's a lot of waves where you want to go first. It just depends on what the score is. And this doesn't count power-ups, by the way. Power-ups.
Well, and it depends. I mean, there's a lot of waves where, yes, you want to go first, but is it worth giving up to take a suboptimal shot, to not close a target, and also not finish the wave? So you're throwing away maybe 100 points by not closing that last target. If it's an easy target you could close, I mean, you're throwing away the 50-point bonus for ending the wave, but you're also throwing away the 50-point bonus for closing a target in one shot. And so you're throwing away a lot of points. And it's because of that I don't think this comes up that much. It's because there's not a ton of places in the game where that first shot on a wave is overpowering, but there are 10%, 15%, maybe 20% of waves in the game where that is an issue. And in my opinion anyway, and that's what this discussion is all about.
I'll say, I'll put a simpler method on it. If you're within 2 to 3 shots of your opponent, it's prominent. So there's also situations where I know I won't survive the opening shot. Maybe I'm playing a little below my par that day, and I know that I won't survive the opener. So I have to get it away from you, right? So it's not about what the score is. It's about how often the opportunity to do this presents itself. Because the score is dynamic, right? We can't predict the score. It could be one thing. It could be another. It's how many times the opportunity could be there. And that is where this conversation takes place. And the answer to that, as I cycle through my waves here and look even more, it's a lot. If you're outside of 2.5, maybe 3, maybe 3.5 shots, you're exactly right. This doesn't even come into play, because you need those points, and you have to move on and try and hope your opponent misses. But at that point, just like you like to say, is you should have done better, right? Like at some point, you have to put yourself in a situation where you say, I should have done better. So just to be clear to anyone out there who may be listening to the conversation still after the break, is that it really centers around how many times it can potentially happen. And, ups and downs, wave 4, right? Ups and downs, wave 5, I want to go first. What was the knockout punch that we were looking at here? Ziggurat, wave 3, I want to go first. There's a lot of situations where this happens. It's just a matter of, now that we're all up to speed, is that how do we feel about it, right? And how you mentioned it comes to a crawl, I'll counter, and I'll overlay some videos here with some timestamps on them so you can see it. It comes to a crawl, but it's quick. So like if I'm trying to battle for that last shot and there's 10 seconds left, right? What are we talking about here? Out of 7-minute waves, let's say 9 minutes, because there's 2 on the last. Out of a potential 9 minutes, we're taking 30 seconds to play a quick, not even 30. Maybe 30 over the course of the set to play a quick cat and mouse.
Again, the worst example of this is Open Space 2, and you can have 35 seconds, 40 seconds where you're just sitting there wasting time with each other, just having a chat, waiting for the clock to tick down. That is the most egregious example in
That's
the
a
game
big
is
one,
Open
yeah.
Space 2 Wave 1. That's the biggest problem. I mean, yeah, we keep mentioning it over and over again. That wave specifically is the biggest problem in the game. I'm not sure which of you guys at One Hampstead designed it, and I actually do like that wave in general.
It's fun.
It's just,
it's a fun one.
It's really, it really has some fun ideas to it. It's just when they designed it, they didn't know that, you know, us players were going to be such dicks about it and ruin their creation and play it this way.
God
But
damn,
it
those
does
metas.
it has the most problem. What sucks is that the waves that have these huge first shots, well, it's because in my mind, perfectly balanced waves can get a little boring. So it's kind of nice to have waves where you have these giant shots on them. It's exciting. It's fun because you can have these crazy elaborate shots that are just so exciting to pinball around and to get. Yeah. But it's maybe less sporting. It's not as fair. It makes it less fair, but more fun. And so Open Space 2, I think, is a lot of fun, but it is very swingy. It's very more luck based than a lot of waves. A lot of it comes down to who shoots first. And so that's kind of, that's a problem. Potentially. I think there's always an argument to be made in any game, or this game especially too, is what kind of balance do you want between luck and skill? You know, a game that is just perfectly skill based, where there's, for instance, like chess, is really interesting, really engaging, but that's probably not what most video gamers nowadays want to play. They don't want to just play chess where you're just sitting there thinking all the time. They want some random shit to happen every once in a while to increase the excitement. And in that case, in my opinion, a little bit of bad luck is okay, because if it makes the game more fun.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you're playing a video game, right? So as soon as you strap on your headset, you sign on to that idea of video game world, let's say. So to your point, though, there is nothing more satisfying than hitting that 600-point shot on one shot wave 4. It's incredibly satisfying, but at the other end, you have to remember it's not so fun for the person watching, right? So here comes the balance, right? Like, how do we do that? So it's an interesting one. That was pretty good. I'll be damned if anybody watching this isn't going to be on the same page by now, man.
You think we've convinced them? I don't know.
Yeah.
This is all propaganda here? I see this is a propaganda film trying to convince everybody. I get you.
Yeah, everybody.
I'm with you. All right. I'm on the team. Sure.
All right, cool, man. Well, I think this was really fun. I'm glad you got
a chance to hop
on. I know you're busy and traveling there in your mobile home, so.
In my van right now. Yep. On the road for the next 3 months till Thanksgiving. I'll get back home to St. Louis. So yeah.
All right, man. Well, safe travels. I'm sure I'll see you sometime either later today or some this week in game. So.
Absolutely.
All right. Always a pleasure, man.
Good talking to you, Syntech. All right. See you, buddy.
All right. See you guys.